Welcome aboard Just Jets with your captain, Matt O'Leary. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Hey, what's going on? I'm Matt O'Leary back with episode number 13 of Just Jets. What's going on? Hope you're here and having a good time. Before we get started, you can follow me on social media at Matt O'Leary NY. Episode number 13. The weeks are just flying by. We have a lot to get to today, and we are actually going to start out with CJ Mosley. So yesterday, he had a pretty interesting quote where he said it would be crazy, essentially, if the New York Jets traded Jamal Adams. And while I think that is completely true, that is not even the biggest story in my eyes from CJ Mosley. It's that he's not 100% healthy just yet. And that's the thing about groin injuries. They are very, very difficult to rebound from. And I know it's been almost a year. He got hurt in week 1, came back against the Patriots, and then it was just never really right in that game, and then they pretty much called it a season for him. But still, even at this point, in now almost the middle of May, he's still not 100%. He's getting there. He expects to be ready for training camp, which is exactly what you need. Now, training camp is probably going to be a little bit on the different side this year with everything going on with the coronavirus. But one thing is for certain, the impact that CJ Mosley is going to have on this team is going to be phenomenal. We saw it in a brief flash in week 1 against the Buffalo Bills. That game completely turned when he came out. 100% different. The fourth quarter, the quarter that he missed, was a disaster. But before that, he was a beast. He was all over the field. He was breaking up passes in the end zone. He was picking up stuff and bringing it into the end zone for touchdowns. He was unbelievable in that game. He really was. And if he doesn't get hurt, the Jets probably win that game. And their season's probably looking a little bit different. And that's, unfortunately, you can't go back and change that. But he was really, really good. He had a 75 Pro Football Focus grade in the 2 games that he played in 2019. The year before that, in 2018, he had a 70.1 Pro Football Focus grade. So he is someone who you could expect to be an above average interior linebacker. And it looks like the Jets aren't going to cut Avery Williamson. At this point, it would be surprising if they did. I think it would have happened already, or they would have tried to move him at the draft. The fact that he's still on the roster, I think, shows that they want to have that depth in case that Mosley isn't available to go. Now, something that I'm a little bit concerned with is the amount of money that you're allocating to a position that's not really that valuable. Inside linebacker doesn't rank very high in terms of positions that are game-changing positions. Don't get me wrong, CJ Mosley and Avery Williamson, too, for that matter, are 2 very good inside linebackers. I just don't know how much of a difference having a good inside linebacker is going to make. Kind of like having the best strong safety in the league. How much of a difference is that really making? Now, if the Jets had the best pass rusher in the league or the best corner in the league, maybe things are a little bit different for them. Or the best, if you want to go on the offense side of the ball, best quarterback or left tackle in the league, you're looking probably a little bit different. But I wanted to really talk about his impact for 2020. So last year, the Jets were 10th overall in defensive DVOA. They were really, really good. Greg Williams had that unit overachieve. And by a long shot, I thought this was going to be a unit that maybe finished between 20 and 25 just because the personnel. He didn't have all that great personnel. Yes, the defensive line was very, very good. The inside linebackers were good, and safety was good. But the cornerback situation was terrible last year. Tremaine Johnson was awful. Dow Roberts really, really wet the bed after having a promising 2018 season. So, and then, you put in there the lack of edge presence, and it was just a recipe for a very mediocre defense, especially when you look at what the Jets were defensively in 2018 with Todd Bowles. I didn't expect them to make that leap, but they did. They were a top 10 defense in the league, and kudos to Greg Williams for, one, he had a million injuries on that side of the ball too, but the excuses were never there. He got guys to come in and produce on a weekly basis and no-name guys. Bless Austin and Arthur Mollett were able to hold down their own. He had a career year from Brian Poole. He's back on a 1-year deal, thank God, to play slot corner. And he had a really, really good unit. something to keep in mind, even with CJ Mosley coming back, I don't see how this defense could be better than 10th. And that's not to say that the personnel isn't better, because I agree, or I believe, I guess I should say, that this team on paper is better defensively. It's better offensively too. It's an all-around better team. But with their schedule, which came out this past week, if you didn't see that video, make sure to go back and look at that after you're done with this one. Their schedule is going to be an extremely difficult one with some high-octane offenses. So you're going against the AFC West and the NFC West. We'll start with the AFC and then go to the NFC. In the AFC, you have the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champions. They could put up 30-plus points on anybody. They are a really, really good team. And how the Jets are going to be able to go on the road and handle themselves is going to be a real tough ask of anybody, but especially a younger, growing team like the New York Jets. Then after that, you have a team like the Denver Broncos. Yes, they are coming to MetLife, going from the West Coast to the East Coast. But that team is one of the most improved teams in the NFL. They had a phenomenal draft. Drew Lock, I think, is going to take a step forward in year 2. I think they're a team that could push for the playoffs. They're not going to be an easy offense to face by a long shot. That offense is going to be really good this year. After that, you have the Vegas Raiders, who I know they drafted a million wide receivers in this draft, but I don't know how high their ceiling offensively is going to be. They'll be probably okay offensively, but I don't think they're going to be world beaters. Maybe like a 7-9, 8 team, somewhere in there. And then the Chargers are a little bit of a wild card. They'll probably have a rookie quarterback, I'd imagine. They're playing the Jets in week 6, I believe. And I'd imagine that they'd probably make the transition from Tyrod Taylor over to Justin Herbert by that point, I would think, especially if they start slow. If they're something like 1-5 or 2-4, maybe they look to flip things over and see the final 10-11 games out of their rookie quarterback. I wouldn't, that's exactly what happened with Tyrod Taylor in Cleveland with Baker Mayfield in 2018. I expect something similar to happen in 2020 with Justin Herbert. On the NFC West side of things, the 49ers, that offense just works, man. Kyle Shanahan's a genius. We know that. Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, they are just a juggernaut, so that's not going to be easy to go on the road and play them. Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals, you guys know I'm a big Cliff Kingsbury fan. That offense is going to be much, much better in year 2. And then the Rams, well, yes, they've taken a little bit of a beating after being in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. They have a ton of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball still. And Sean McVay, there's no denying that he has a great offensive mind. So that is going to be an extremely difficult division to play against. Obviously, the AFC East isn't going to necessarily be a high-powered offensive division rather. I don't think the Bills are going to be phenomenal offense. They are more riding on the defense, and the offense does just enough. The Dolphins are still a team that's growing, and the Patriots without Tom Brady and Jarrett Stidham at the helm is definitely going to look a little bit different. So I just don't necessarily believe that the New York Jets are going to be able to make much of a leap from the 10th spot. I would expect them to finish somewhere between maybe 10 and 14. I'll say they probably, if I had to bet on today, I would say they have the 12th ranked defense in DVOA in 2020. Granted, things could change. Maybe, teams take step backs further than we expect. But I think that it's going to be really difficult for them to replicate what they were able to do last year just based on who they are playing in 2020. Next up, I want to get into Larry Warford. He was cut by the New Orleans Saints. Yes, I did a video earlier on the week on this, but this was the biggest news story NFL-wise of the week, so I wanted to hit on it again in the pod for the new audience and stuff like that. And I got some questions on it too, so I wanted to go a little bit more in depth on it. So this is a guy who's 28 years old. He was a Pro Bowler each of the last 3 years. His Pro Football Focus grade, 73.1, 66.5, 69.7. He's really, really, really good in pass pro. His previous contract had an AAV of $8.5 million, so if you are signing him, you'd have to imagine that you're going to have to give him somewhere between 8, 10, maybe upwards of $10 million if a bidding war happens. This is a guy the New York Jets should go out of their way for, especially because you have the luxury of cutting Brian Winters and freeing up $7 million in salary cap space. There is zero reason to keep Brian Winters around. literally and figuratively, because if you cut him, it costs you nothing against the cap. Literally nothing. You save his entire cap hit, which is $7 million and change. And then you could use that money, add $3 million on top of that, and there you go. There's your AAV for what Larry Warford's going to cost you. And that completely revamps what the offensive line could look like for this team. It really would. And the reason why I'm bringing him back up is because I got a lot of questions. Well, why was he cut if he was so good? Well, the Saints are in a cap crunch. They don't have the best cap situation. Their offensive line's good. They paid a ton of money to the other guard that they have. So I understand why they were trying to move on from him. Could they have traded him? Maybe. With that cap hit, it's going to be a little bit on the tough side. But I would be all over this guy. He's a top 10 guard in the league. They don't just become available in May very often. This completely changes the offensive line. You put him and Becton on the left side with McGovern in the middle. That is an elite left side. That's really, really good. Now, Fant at right tackle is a question mark. And then you have Alex Lewis / Greg Van Roten. They compete for that right guard spot. The other one just becomes depth, which is a great guy to have coming off your bench because you know that injuries could happen. And then you have Jonathan Harrison and other guys who can come, off the bench and provide pretty good depth, and Chuma Doga. So you need to add as much depth as humanly possible. We saw how many injuries there were with this team last year and how bad the offensive line was. If I'm Joe Douglas, this is a complete no-brainer. Why not bring this guy in? You have nothing to lose. This is someone who, like I said, he's a top 10 guard. This is a plug-and-play guy. The only reason he's available is because the team he was playing for has a tough cap situation. They can't afford to pay him. Now, a lot of guys, or a lot of teams, I guess I should say, are interested. Upwards of 20 teams have been looking at this guy, and I get it. I do, but if I'm Joe, I'm paying whatever it takes. If it takes $11 million, get it done. This is someone you could sign for 4 years, and he could be productive on a 4-year deal. It completely changes the trajectory of that offensive line, because right now they're improved, but by how much? They were a bottom 3 offensive line in the league last year. Now, maybe at absolute best, they are middle of the pack, probably somewhere in the high teens in offensive line. Bringing a guy like Warford, now you're looking at like legitimately middle of the pack to maybe pushing the over the halfway hump of offensive lines in the league. I don't think you're getting into the top 10, but maybe you're a little bit better than average. And that just makes life so much easier for your quarterback in Sam Darnold, which is what we're trying to do here. At the end of the day, your goal for 2020, obviously, yes, you want to make the playoffs, but you want to make life as easy for Sam Darnold as possible, because the last 2 years has been anything but easy for Sam Darnold. In 2018, he had a rough situation. He didn't have that many playmakers. Yes, he had Robbie Anderson. That was about it. He had Chris Herndon. Running back situation wasn't great in 2018. We know that. He had a bad coach in Todd Bowles and a bad offensive coordinator in Jeremy Bates. We know that for a fact, but it's just... and then in 2019, you go over with Adam Gase and the amount of injuries, and he gets mono, and there was just one thing after another. He hasn't had the easiest of starts to his NFL career, but when you look at his age, he's 22 years old. He has flashed enough to make you believe that he is the guy going forward, but you have to make it easier for him, right? Because you look at the other quarterbacks who were drafted in that first round, life is much easier for each and every one of them. We'll start with outside of Josh Rosen. That's a caveat, outside of Josh Rosen, but we'll start with Baker Mayfield, the Cleveland Browns. They went all out in trying to make it life easier. They went out and traded for Odell Beckham Jr. Did it work? Not last year, but they greatly improved the offensive line in the NFL draft by drafting Jedrick Wills, and they also signed the best offensive tackle on the market in free agency in Jack Conklin. So they are really trying to make life as easy as possible for their young quarterback. Lamar Jackson completely changed that offense. They went from a guy with about as boring a quarterback as you could have in Joe Flacco. They played a conservative game to a high octane, high-powered offense with Lamar Jackson at the helm, more running, more read options, all that stuff. And it worked wonders for that team. They said, look at Lamar Jackson's skill set. We are going to change our offense and make it built around him. That's making life easier for your quarterback. Josh Allen, you guys know how I feel about Josh Allen. I think he's flawed as a passer, but they made life easier because they traded for Stephon Diggs. Every one of these young quarterbacks are getting the help that they need. Even guys that were taken in last year's draft class, like Daniel Jones. Did I think it was a reach for Daniel Jones at 6? Yes. But have the Giants done a good job in making life easier for Daniel Jones? They have. It's not perfect, but it's a better situation than what Sam Darnold has. And I'm not saying each and every one of those quarterbacks is better than Sam Darnold, necessarily. That's not necessarily the case. I don't believe it to be the case. But I do believe that their organizations put them in a better chance to succeed. And I don't think you could really make the argument against that. I really don't. So yes, at the end of the day, Larry Warford makes life easier for your young quarterback. Get it done. Next topic that I wanted to hit on was a little bit with the schedule, but more so with the floor ceiling. So the schedule came out, and of course, like everyone else, I went through each and every game and went win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. And what I saw from the schedule, and there's no denying that it's a tough one. We just talked about earlier in the show, you got to play the AFC West and the NFC West, which isn't easy. And you have to do a ton of traveling. You're going to the West Coast to play in LA 2 separate times this year. It's not an easy schedule. But I think when you look at the floor and the ceiling of this team, it's not a huge gap. Like, I don't think this is a team where you're going to be like, oh, the bottom could fall out and they're going to go 3-13. And maybe if everything works out, you go 11-5. So that's a huge gap, obviously, between 3-13, 11-5. I think you're looking at, if I'm going to define this team's floor and ceiling, I think the floor of this team is 6-10, and the ceiling is 10-6. I don't see them being much worse than 6-10 or much better than 10-6. You look at last year, dumpster fire. It started terribly, 1-7. Granted, they turned it around and finished 6-2. More so because of Greg Williams and that defense. The offense still wasn't really all that productive in most of the weeks down the stretch outside of games against the Redskins and the Giants and the Raiders mixed in there. But I think that's my issue, or one of my issues with Adam Gase is I don't see him as someone who is ever going to be able to get beyond mediocre. Like, this is a team. This team seems destined, and that's why I picked. Because if you have 6-10 and 10-6, I split the difference. So when I went through, I said they're going to be 8-8. I think you're looking at a 7 or an 8 win team this year, and I think that's like the definition of Adam Gase is he's not going to be bad enough for you to be, a bottom feeder, right? He is not going to be someone who finishes 2-14, but at the same time, I find it hard to believe that he's going to replicate his 2016 season, go 10-6 again. Like, I think that was a little bit of an outlier. To me, this guy just screams, Jeff Fisher, I'm going to go 7-9 every single year. And with this roster, they could probably, I think the point that I want to make is I would feel a little bit more comfortable going into this year with a different coach. Because if you look around the league and you rank the coaches outside of the new ones, because you don't know what they are. So out of every single returning coach, it's got to be bottom 3. Has to. Doug Marrone, you want to put behind him? Sure. Maybe you want to put Matt Patricia behind him? Okay, sure. Bill O'Brien, I don't think he's a good general manager. I don't think he's a good head coach either, but he's had a ton more success than Adam Gase. I would find it hard to believe to put him behind it. He's not much better than Adam Gase, I'll give you that, but he's got to be ahead of him. This team is not going to be a bottom feeder. They are not going to be 4-12. Right? I don't expect the wheels to fall off. I don't think it's going to be a disaster. I think they'll be a very streaky team. Some weeks they'll come out and they'll look like, wow, this is a legitimate NFL offense. This is a legitimate NFL teams. And then other weeks they're just not going to show up. And it's going to really make you wonder, what the heck is this team? Which that lends you to believe that your team is going to finish 7-9 or 8-8. And I don't think that's good enough to bring your coach back over. Like, let's say the offense gets a little bit better this year. They're not much better, but let's say, they finished 31st in DVOA last year. If they finish 25th in offensive DVOA and go 7-9 again, are you bringing Adam Gase back? I wouldn't. I would really find it hard to believe to do that. I think he has to make the playoffs. Your team hasn't made the playoffs in a decade, and I understand not wanting to, turn over coaches year after year after year. I get that. But it's also not good to latch on to and hamstring yourself to bad coaches and bad general managers. That's what you did with Todd Bowles and Mike Maccagnan. Hanging on to both those guys for as long as they did were bad. Both of them should have been gone after 2017. Let's be real here. The signs were there even the first year in 2015. Mike Maccagnan just went out and spent a crap ton of money for a Band-Aid fix. And it worked the first year to an extent. I don't think Todd Bowles did a great job coaching that team. I don't. He showed flaws as a game manager. And then the next year, the roster just got worse. The drafting got worse. Like, the Christian Hackenberg pick made 0 sense at that time. 0. They were going all in, and I understand that you didn't have Ryan Fitzpatrick on the roster yet, but you knew we were bringing back Ryan Fitzpatrick or some other veteran quarterback. You had a veteran roster, right? You were going all in with that roster. You don't spend the second-round pick on a developmental quarterback at that point. And then you don't take a quarterback in 2017 because of that pick. You essentially wasted those 2 years, and then eventually you got Sam. I get that, and I'm happy that Sam's here. But both of those guys should have been gone. So the only argument really for keeping Gase around, unless he drastically turns it around, and I hope he does. I really hope he does. That would make my life so much easier and Jets fans' lives so much easier. I don't want to root for Adam Gase to fail. I'm not rooting for Adam Gase to fail. Contrary to popular belief, I am not. I would write in a perfect world, in an absolutely perfect world, Adam Gase makes me eat my words. This team goes 11-5, and the offense is a top 10 offense in the league. I'll shut up. I promise you. I will shut up, and I will praise Adam Gase and say, you know what? You did a great job this year, Adam. Your team made the playoffs. The offense was top 10 in the league. You had your team stayed healthy. Great. I'm just not betting on that happening. That's the difference here, guys. I'm not actively rooting for these things. I'm not. I'm just sitting here looking at all the facts, everything, and that's what I'm coming up with as what I think is the most likely outcome or what I would like to be done different. And if the team is 6-10 at their floor or 7-9 and not in the playoffs, which I don't see how you're under 500 and not making the playoffs, then I think you have to move on. Even at 8-8, I'm moving. I would have a playoff mandate. I would. At least a significant sign of turning this thing around. Because if it's another year of what we saw last year, which was having a star running back and just not using him properly. The amount of times that they ran him up the middle on 2nd and long is mind-numbing. The lack of time splitting him out wide is mind-numbing. You have one of the best receiving backs in the league. How many times do you line him up in the slot? Not many. Not enough, clearly. You had Bilal Powell, Ty Montgomery, and Le'Veon Bell. 3 guys who are versatile backs. How many times were all 3 of them on the field at the same time? It's not rocket science here. They need to figure it out. But with the floor and the ceiling, it's a small margin. 6-10, 10-6. Essentially mediocrity. Very okay. That's essentially what Adam Gase is and has been for his entire career outside of working with Peyton Manning. Very okay to bad. And mostly bad because his offenses stink. But he's gotten bailed out at times from Sam Darnold last year and from Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. In Miami, the first year. I don't know. I think that the Jets finished somewhere between 6-10 and 10-6. I'd be stunned if they finish above that or below that. That's really my thing there, and the real thing I wanted to get into. I didn't necessarily look to get into that Adam Gase like little rant thing, but I think it's important to talk about what you think the team's floor and ceiling is going to look like. And when you look at that schedule, it's a tough one. It really is. So without further ado, we're going to get into the voicemails this week. We have a few questions. We're going to start off from Liam in Manhattan, and he wants to talk a little bit about quarterbacks on the free agent market.
Hey, Matt, how's it going? It's Liam from Manhattan. So even with drafting James Morgan, do you think we should go after a quarterback that's still available on the free agent market? Thanks.
Yes, 100% yes. So I do not trust James Morgan to be the backup quarterback in 2020. I don't trust David Fales to be the backup in 2020. In a perfect world, I think Morgan is your backup quarterback in 2021. You take him as a developmental long-term backup project, right? He's not here to take over Sam Darnold's job. That's not realistic. But to expect this guy to come out of FIU throwing 14 touchdown passes last year with a monster arm, but no accuracy and no sign of touch is a very, very scary thing. If, God forbid, Sam Darnold goes down this year, I don't want James Morgan to be coming into play. I don't. Matt Moore is still there, who has had success with Adam Gase, no less. Joe Flacco is still hanging around. Cam Newton, I don't think is going to sign for a backup deal, but he's still on the market. I would be looking to bring in one of those guys. I mean, look at what Andy Dalton signed for. How does it not make sense to bring him in, and use that 4th round pick on another double dip in the wide receiver class? That's what I would have done. That's what I think would have made a little bit more sense. You attack a position of need rather than taking a developmental player, because the Jets don't have the luxury of taking a developmental player because they don't have a backup in place, which, yes, I understand. All the arguments that I've received against my criticism of that pick was that the Jets, the backup quarterback is a really important position, and that Joe Douglas has won a Super Bowl with the Eagles as the backup quarterback. I get that. Nick Foles was their backup quarterback. They didn't draft Nick Foles that year. He was in the NFL. He was already a proven player at that point. You need a proven backup. You can't bet on a rookie 4th rounder to be your backup. That doesn't make sense. Could Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco, Matt Moore be your backup in 2020? Yes. If Sam Darnold has to miss 2 games, I hope he doesn't. Knock on wood. Sam Darnold is healthy and playing 16 games. You don't have to worry about it. But he's missed 3 games each the last 2 years. So you have to have that safety net there. It'd be stupid not to. And the safety net's not really there with David Fales or James Morgan. It's more like if you're watching the circus and they're doing the high-rise beam and your safety net's like on fire, like as a trick. Because that's what going into 2020 with Fales or Morgan would be. You're lighting your safety net on fire. So yes, I definitely think the 2 names that I brought up right there, Flacco or Morgan, would make a ton of sense. Next up is Cody. He wants to talk about the wide receiver lineup a little bit. It's a bit of a longer question. Bear with us on this one, but we're going to talk about the wide receiver depth chart.
Hey, Matt. This is Cody from New York. I just want to say big fan of the show. Love tuning in and talking Jets football. My question is, I wanted to talk a little bit about, post-draft wide receiver lineup. I was just watching some Brandon Marshall highlights from back in the day, and, I love what he did. He was the big target, Fitzpatrick could throw it up to, and I do believe Mims could be that guy, and I like the pickup of Lawrence Cager from Georgia, undrafted free agent, or undrafted rookie there. And, he's a big frame kind of guy, but there's a guy named Des Bryant out there, and I don't really see a lot of people talking about him. I know he's working hard. Maybe it's the headache that he could bring to the team, or his recent injury history. But I think he could be a big help to this offense. Give him that big frame guy, strong physical receiver for Sam to throw it up to. And like I said, I do think Mims could be that guy. But and I like the speed we added with Perryman as well. I believe we got the speed aspect covered. But, the big frame guy that you can throw it up to in the end zone, like a Des Bryant type, watching what Brandon Marshall did. You look at Julio Jones, all the big-time receivers. I just want to know what your opinion is on, maybe looking into signing Des Bryant. Thanks again. Big fan of the show. Have a good one.
I definitely appreciate the question, Cody. So I am a little bit worried about going out and signing Des Bryant. And I liked Bryant when he was healthy. Like, if we're talking 2014, great. I'm all for Des Bryant. But he hasn't played in the league in 2 years. At this point, I know he's put in a ton of work. I've seen the videos and stuff like that. I'm rooting for him. I hope he gets back into the league. But a 31-year-old who hasn't played in 2 years scares me a little bit. I think at this point, not a huge fan of this guy, but bringing back Demaryius Thomas on a cheap 1-year deal would probably fill that same role. He's a big body guy as well. And I also like that you bring up the guy Cager from Georgia. He's 6'5". That guy's big. And I think that kid could play. Now, I don't expect him to come in and catch 10 touchdowns or anything like that and put up big numbers. Maybe a situational red zone threat kind of thing. I definitely think the Jets have to add to their wide receiver room. But I don't think Des Bryant's the right fit for that. And my biggest thing for him is just he's been out of the league for a while now. And I don't think the Jets are the right team to take a risk on him. I hope someone else does. I really hope he gets back into the league. But I don't think it's going to be with the Jets. I wouldn't bet on that. Next up is Josh from Woodmere, and he wants to also talk about the wide receiver position.
Hi, Matt. It's Josh from Woodmere. I just wanted to know now, since we know Quincy Enunwa won't be playing for the Jets this year, do you think maybe the Jets sign Demaryius Thomas? Do you think that would make sense? And also, what do you think Denzel Mims needs to do in year one to prove that he could be a number one wide receiver for the Jets in 2021? So, thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you so much for the question. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny, I just mentioned Demaryius Thomas, but I do think they re-sign him. One, he's an Adam Gase guy. Two, he's a big body receiver, which the Jets need. They need a red zone threat. I think you bring him in on a cheap deal, and if he's your fourth wide receiver on the depth chart, that's okay. I just don't want it to be like at times last year when he became like the number 2 target. I don't want you to be feeding this guy. If you have him in certain situations, fine. But you shouldn't be like scheming this guy targets. You know what I mean? But if he's like, a depth receiver, fine. I'm completely okay with that. And I think it'd be cheap. You bring him in $1 million, $2 million, fine. As far as Denzel Mims, look, I think we have to temper expectations in year one a little bit. I love the pick. I really do. I think he's going to be really good. This is someone who I thought, was a first-round talent. I think it's going to take him 2 years to get going in this league. I think you see a lot of receivers who come in, and in their first year, I think you could see him 600, 700 receiving yards and like 4 or 5 touchdowns. And you know what? I think you can get by with that in this year. By year 2, I think you'll be putting up 900 plus receiving yards and pushing, in the 6, 7, 8, 9 touchdowns, somewhere in that range. I don't expect this guy to come in and put up, 800, 900, even breaking 1,000 receiving yards in year 1. I would love it if he did. That would be phenomenal. I just don't think it's a really safe bet. I think you're more likely to see like 600 or 700 receiving yards, a handful of touchdowns. There's going to be ups and downs for him. There's going to be bumps in the road, but I think he'll flash enough to make you believe that he's the guy. I do. His skill set is really, really good. I'm excited about Denzel Mims. I really am. I just don't think he's going to come in and put up a 1,200-yard receiving year or anything crazy like that. It's going to take a little bit of a progression. Not everyone comes into the league and dominates right away, even as a second rounder. So I think you're looking at, pretty average year. Let's say we'll split the difference. We'll go 650 yards, 4 touchdowns. I'll be okay with that. I'll sign up for it. Last one is from Logan from Connecticut, and he wants to do another top 3. So let's hear from Logan.
Hey, Matt. This is Logan from Connecticut again. I have another top 3 question for you, and this one is, who do you think are going to be the top 3 team leaders in sacks in 2020? Thanks.
Okay. I like this one. This is interesting. So the Jets don't necessarily have someone who you're like, this guy's going to lead the team in sacks. He's going to put up double digits. It's probably going to be Jordan Jenkins with 8. That's going to be my guess. Jordan Jenkins will lead the team with 8 sacks. He'll stumble his way into 8 sacks. He's not someone who's a great pass rusher. I like him as an edge setter. I think he would be much better with a speed guy on the other side. But I'll say he leads the way with 8 sacks. Second, I think we see Quinn Williams take a step forward. I think he's someone who you can see get between 6, maybe 7 sacks this year. So I think he'll be second, and then I'll go Jamal. I mean, he had, 6.5 sacks last year, I think. So I could see him getting 5 again. I just don't know, like, Jabari Zuniga, who you took in the third round. Yeah, in the third round. He was the second pick in the third round. I think he's going to be a rotational piece in year 1. So I would not really bet on him getting more than 4 or 5 sacks at the absolute most. Best case scenario, he gets you 5 sacks in a situational pass rusher type of role. Huff, I believe Bryce Huff is the guy. I don't know if it's Bryce. Huff is definitely the last name. He's from Memphis, the edge rusher, who you got as an undrafted free agent. He's going to be maybe at best a situational guy if he makes the roster. I don't think Henry Anderson's going to put up big sack numbers. I don't expect Steve McClendon to. I think really those are the only 3 guys that make sense. Quinn Williams is going to have to take a step forward. He only had 2.5 sacks last year, but I would expect it to be Jordan Jenkins 1, Quinn 2, Jamal 3. That's going to be my guess. Let me know what you thought of the episode down in the comments below, or if you're listening in podcast form, get on me on social media. I'm Matt O'Leary NY. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this show. Greatly appreciate it. It's a blast hanging out with you and doing the longer form content. I love it. It kind of just gives me a little bit of time to sit back, relax, kind of just vent. It's not so much of like editing, and cuts and cuts and cuts. We kind of just hang out and talk. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, I'm Matt O'Leary, and I'll talk to you next time.